Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to sift through, well, a whole stack of reports, legal docs, memos, all the pieces, really,
hmm
and pull out the core story. Today, it's about those recent U.S. military actions against suspected Venezuelan drug boats.
Yeah, and it's more than just, the strikes themselves. What the sources are showing us is this really surprising operational change happening behind the scenes. We're looking at how it was organized and, frankly, a pretty contentious legal basis they used to, well, to greenlight these actions.
Right. So our mission today for you is to unpack two big things that are totally connected. First, how a White House official, Stephen Miller, usually focused on Homeland Security, ended up being the main person directing military strikes. And second, how they justified it legally using an argument that was, well, kind of falling apart in court at the same time. How that executive power was actually used here. That's really the key thing to grasp.
Absolutely. To get the policy, you first got to see where the power was. And the sources, they're pretty clear. Stephen Miller, as Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor, he took a undeniable lead role. He was directing these strikes against those boats.
Okay, a lead role, fine. But the reports suggest something, well, bigger structurally, don't they? That Miller's authority sometimes even trumped Marco Rubio's, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. That seems like a major shift from how things normally work.
It absolutely is. And it wasn't just random, it seems. It happened because of a deliberate internal reorganization. Miller basically pushed to make the Homeland Security Council, the HSC, its own separate thing earlier this year, for Trump's second term.
Okay, let's pause there because that institutional detail, the HSC versus NSC thing, sounds really important. Historically, the HSC was just like a part of the National Security Council, the NSC, right? It reported up the chain.
Exactly. It used to be under the NSC umbrella, reporting to the National Security Advisor. Pulling it out, making it independent, that's a massive structural change. Because the NSC, its whole design is to bring together different views, State Department, Pentagon, intelligence agencies.
Right, it's meant to sort of hash things out, get consensus, be deliberate.
Precisely. Whereas an independent HSC, it has a much narrower focus, mainly on domestic and border threats, reporting straight to the president. So if you bypass the NSC, you're also bypassing a lot of that built-in debate, maybe some skepticism about, say, the diplomatic fallout of hitting boats offshore.
So instead of being this subcommittee trying to fit border policy into the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the HSC becomes its own operational unit, focused on what it defines as a homeland threat, even if it's way out in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it way easier, faster to approve, well, aggressive actions.
That's exactly the implication. And the sources give us concrete examples of this kind of centralized control. The HSC definitely took the lead on dealing with these Venezuelan boats. You see Miller's deputy, Tony Salisbury, and others basically acting like gatekeepers for the strike info, holding it really close until almost the last second.
Yeah, the timing is pretty striking. Like that second strike, the missile hit on September 15th. The Pentagon apparently ID'd the target 4 days earlier. 4 days! But according to these reports, a lot of senior White House people, even in the national security loop, they only found out hours before it actually happened.
That really shows the structural shift in practice, doesn't it? It points to an HSC-driven process that just, well, went around the usual checks and balances. It allowed for much faster, more centralized decisions, even when using pretty serious military hardware.
Which brings us straight to segment 2. The actual strikes, the target.
Hmm.
Venezuelan boats supposedly carrying drugs. And the administration's line was, the usual methods, Coast Guard stuff, just wasn't cutting it. So they needed this more muscular military approach.
Muscular is definitely the word. I mean, look at the force they sent down there. This wasn't your average patrol boat situation. They sent the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group. That's a serious piece of kit designed for, major combat landings.
Can you break that down a bit? What does that group actually involve? It's not just one ship, is it?
Oh, no, not at all. The Iwo Jima ARG had the USS San Antonio, the USS Iwo Jima itself, the USS Fort Lauderdale. Just the ships carry about 4,500 sailors. But then, crucially, they also brought the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, that's another 2,200 Marines, with their own aircraft, landing craft, the whole package.
Okay, wow. An ARG with thousands of Marines. That sounds like something you'd use for, I don't know, a serious military intervention, not chasing suspected drug boats. What does sending that kind of force tell us about how important this operation was to them?
Well, it tells you two things, I think. First, they clearly saw this more as a combat thing, not just law enforcement. And second, connecting back to Miller's role we talked about, his influence with the president seems key here. It likely helped push this right to the top of the priority list, making sure those Significant resources were available immediately. The policy really flowed from who was in charge organizationally.
Officially, though, the White House line was simpler. A spokesperson just said the president directed it, he oversees foreign policy, and, quote, the entire administration is working together with clear success.
Right, that's the unified front picture. But spending those kinds of resources, sending that kind of force, it immediately throws up a huge red flag about something even more fundamental.
Yeah.
Did they actually have the legal right to fire those missiles?
Exactly. And that operational shift, the sheer force involved, it's kicked up a lot of dust. Which brings us to what the sources call the dubious legal justification. Some critics didn't mince words, calling the strikes extrajudicial killings in international waters.
That's incredibly strong language, yeah. And it hits a core issue in international law, hitting a vessel on the high seas. How do you justify using lethal force against, well, suspected criminals, non-state actors, without a war declaration or some immediate threat to your own forces right there?
So why that specific charge, extrajudicial murder? What's the thinking there?
Well, the argument is without a clear legal framework like a UN mandate or being formally at war, attacking someone like that outside your territory, it could be seen as operating completely outside the normal rules of engagement, the laws of armed conflict. The administration, though, they had their own internal justification ready.
And that was based on the president's Article 2 powers, is that it?
That was the core of their internal argument, yes. They claimed Trump was using his constitutional Article 2 powers for self-defense in, limited military engagements.
Okay, but that's a big leap, isn't it? Hitting a suspected drug boat way down in the Caribbean. How does that become immediate self-defense for the United States?
That is where the cartel designation comes in. It's absolutely central, and also where things get really, really controversial. The whole self-defense claim basically rested on designating one specific Venezuelan cartel, Tren de Aragua, TDG, as a foreign terrorist organization.
And the sources point to Miller pushing this rationale hard, right? Initially, it was about deporting Venezuelans using the Alien Enemies Act earlier this year.
Correct. The logical jump they made was this. They claimed TDG had infiltrated the Venezuelan government, Maduro's regime, so deeply that the cartel was basically the state now. So any TDG member, whether they were in the U.S. or on a boat, wasn't just a criminal. They were part of a, quote, predatory incursion by a hostile foreign nation.
So if the cartel is the nation, hitting the cartel is like hitting the nation in self-defense.
That's the logic. Miller himself was quoted saying something like, it is a drug cartel that is running Venezuela. It is not a government. It is a drug cartel.
Right.
If you buy that premise, then maybe the strikes look a bit more like Article 2 self-defense. Maybe.
But wait, if you're going to say a criminal group is the government, you need proof, right? Solid evidence. Did the administration actually show that TDG and the Maduro regime were one and the same?
Well, no. That's the sticking point. The sources really emphasize that they haven't provided clear, concrete evidence publicly or even, it seems, internally to satisfy everyone. And legal experts were saying, look, the strikes are only justifiable if you can really make that connection stick.
And this wasn't just theory, right? This exact legal idea was being tested in court because of those deportations you mentioned.
Exactly. That's the crucial contradiction. Just before the strikes, on September 2nd, a federal appeals court, the Fifth Circuit, actually ruled on those deportations. And a divided panel said those deportations, based on the same idea that TDG equals Maduro, were unlawful. Why? Because the administration hadn't met the high legal bar to prove TDG was truly an arm of the Venezuelan state. The court basically shot down the core premise needed for the strikes.
Wow. So the legal foundation for the military action was already crumbling in a U.S. court.
It really pulls the rug out from under it. If TDG isn't considered an arm of the state for deportation purposes under U.S. law, it's very difficult to then turn around and say they are a hostile state actor justifying military self-defense on the high seas.
Okay, this leads to the final, maybe most unsettling piece. Who actually signed off on this? With the NSC being restructured, who gave the legal okay for actions based on this shaky court-rejected idea?
That's the critical gap, and it loops right back to that organizational change we started with. Because the HSC and the changed NSC, they were operating without their own dedicated in-house lawyers like they used to have. They had to sort of borrow legal advice.
Borrowed counsel. What does that even mean in practice?
Yeah.
Who's accountable?
It means the legal okay didn't come from someone embedded in the council, focused solely on its operations and legal integrity day to day. Instead, the sources suggest the sign-offs came from the Pentagon's top lawyer, Earl Matthews, who used to be a White House lawyer himself, plus the Justice Department and the White House counsel's office, specifically whoever handled NSC matters there.
So let me get this straight. We have strikes directed by this newly powerful independent counsel, the HSC, based on a legal self-defense claim that a court just rejected, and the legal green light came not from a dedicated NSC-HSC lawyer, but was kind of farmed out to other departments that might have other priorities.
That synthesis pretty much captures what this deep dive has uncovered. You see this direct line. The organizational change making the HSC independent seems to have enabled the pushing forward of this very debatable legal argument, the PDG estate thing, which then paved the way for quick military action.
So for you, the listener, trying to make sense of how the executive branch works now, you really have to look beyond just the big cabinet titles. You need to track these internal counsel shifts, like giving the HSC independence. That's where the real operational power seems to have been in this case.
And the final thought we want to leave you with really centers on that legal approval process, or maybe the lack of a dedicated one. Think about what it means for the HSC and NSC to operate without their own full-time embedded legal counsel right there in the room, relying on sign-offs from lawyers and other departments. Does that weaken the internal check against potentially risky or legally questionable actions?
Yeah. How does that structural gap change how these critical decisions about using military force get made? And who's ultimately accountable? When you sort of outsource that immediate legal gut check for actions that happen fast, what gets lost? Is it caution? Due diligence?
Definitely something to keep in mind as you watch how national security policy unfolds. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.